Welcome back to the Shared Practices Podcast. This is Season 2, Episode 33. And if you didn't listen to the very last bit of last episode, Richard is going to be out for a week or two. We didn't have time to coordinate doing the intro outros like we normally do, so it'll just be me for the next couple weeks. But if you listened to last episode, we had Brian Pender on the line. And if you didn't, I'll give you a brief idea of who Brian is. Brian's a buyer's coach and buyer's representative, and he works with us buyers quite a bit in helping us look at practice opportunities and helps us find practice opportunities. And so I'll leave his information in the show notes. And if you are in the process of looking at a practice and you need some help, or I think what he may do, the biggest service is helping people actually find practices, because a lot of times that's the hardest part. He's very helpful there, and I'd recommend you reach out to him. In the last episode, we talked about the seller's perspective with the first episode with Brian. In today's episode, we're really going to talk about partnerships. And partnerships isn't really something we've talked about a whole lot on the podcast. We talked about it in Season 2, Episode 10 with Cameron and his experience with his attorney going through the partnership. But I think in this episode, we do it in a little bit more structured of a way, just like we did the seller's perspective last time. So we'll really help you look through a partnership in a more systematic way. What kind of things are you looking for? It's a lot more of a personal fit between you and your partner. And so we have an episode resource for you, just like we did last week. The link is in the show notes, or you can just download it straight off our Facebook group if you're interested. And without any further ado, here's the episode with Brian Pender about partnerships. I am back here today with Brian Pender. And Brian, we had a previous episode with Brian where we talked about the seller's perspective and really learning what's important to the seller with the purpose of being able to, as a buyer, navigate the deal better and not upset your seller and ultimately get a deal done. And today we're going to talk about partnerships. And that's something we haven't talked about a whole lot on the podcast, but it has come up, and a lot of listeners let me know that they're looking at partnerships. And so I felt there was a need for it. And Brian is, he'll introduce himself, but he definitely is qualified to talk on the subject. And so I thought it'd be great for him to come on and talk about partnerships and some things to look for and some things maybe not to look for. So I'll let Brian introduce himself, and then we'll jump right in.
Thanks, George. Very excited to be here today. And I am, as George mentioned, Brian Pender. I'm president and founder of Fairway Healthcare Partners. And we help dentists buy, sell, protect, and grow their practices. And so we work, exclusively with buyers or exclusively with sellers. We do practice valuations. And then we also, what we deem as kind of alternative transitions with partnership agreements, group practices looking to standardize procedures, build business plans, and continuing to grow. And so, we do work with single doctor partner that are looking to add a partner or are continuing to add partners. So the market and the growth in group practices is well documented within the industry, and we help dentists kind of build those out.
As a buyer's representative, do you feel like? So I before we talk about all the specifics, do you feel like partnerships, are they more on market? Or are they more off market? Do they usually list them with a broker, or are they mainly hiring their associate with the idea of eventually making them a partner?
I think they come together more organically with either an associate joining the ranks of a partner or within local markets, two dentists partnering together, much more so than publicly, listed partnership opportunities, but those are definitely out there. And a lot of opportunities are listed as, associate with opportunity to buy in. And so those are definitely different than kind of jumping right into a partnership. So, but senior doctors are open to it, and it's hard for them to commit right up front unless they know somebody to really jump officially into a partnership.
Yeah, and I think a partnership is a lot different than a sale. We talk a lot about sales, but this is really a long-term relationship. And so I think it'd be good to start with why they do partner. And so in your experience, over the people of the types of dentists that get partnerships, what are their motivations behind it?
Yeah, so for the senior partners, hopefully they want to grow their practice. And that should be the most important characteristic for entering into a partnership is you want to grow. And they also might want to start cutting back on their hours or their administrative responsibilities, or have somebody to share that with, share overhead expenses, whatever it might be. they're not interested in selling to corporate most times, right? They would want to keep an ownership stake in the business. They don't want to be told what to do all the time, but they still want somebody to, help drive the growth and share the burden of ownership. And, they do this to hang on to high potential associates too, from the perspective of a senior partner. You get somebody who's a rock star associate, all of a sudden you see the growth of your practice and what that might look like over the course of a long period of time. And so before they get away and buy their own practice, why don't, lock them up as a partner and grow together? And for junior partners, they're easy to kind of get entry to. I guess it's a softer entry point than buying your own practice. If you are an associate and have somebody that's willing to take you on as a partner, it's certainly, you've developed a connection. You might be able to have them finance the deal versus having to get a bank loan. And, there's an opportunity to have a senior partner mentor as you get going in your career. And, that is more valuable, less valuable, depending on, the capabilities of your partner and, your personal interest and skills.
Do you feel like there are people who may be better suited for partnerships and some people who are better suited for ownership? Or do you feel like somebody who's looking to buy a practice could equally look for a partnership? Or do you feel like maybe some people may be better fitted for one or the other?
I would definitely say that it's better fit personalities for ownership versus partnerships. There's different differences between the group. Some people would succeed in any path. I think the majority of dentists are lone wolves a little bit, and are, if you're the classic entrepreneurial A-type, love cranking through dentistry, love the business of dentistry, you're definitely better suited to own your own practice than going into a partnership. The partnerships are people who are more compassionate, a little bit more free-spirited personalities that would rather share and build something together that's great versus, and eliminate some of the stress that goes along with being a solo doc owner.
I'm really happy you said that, because, partnerships, I see the value for other people, but for myself, I never really see myself as a good fit for a partnership with, obviously my wife and I are going to be partners, but, with somebody else. And, but I think somebody who would really like to take a month off, for example, and like go travel or do something like that I would never do, might be better suited for a partnership and sharing the ownership burden. Would you agree with that type of sentiment?
Yeah, and I remember in a prior episode that you had with Jason Patrick Wood, and I think it was maybe Richard doing the episode, but he talked about his best partner clients were two women who were totally empathetic, totally committed to one another as business partners to cover all their other life stuffs, and that translated into their practice culture, and they were fit for partnership. So. You kind of need to decide which of that are. And when you get an opportunity as an associate to potentially join as a partner, you need to think long and hard, because it might be really tempting to jump in and say, hey, I'm going to be a partner with this. But as you alluded to in the episode, when you enter into a partnership, this is a huge commitment that you're looking to last tens of decades or the rest of your career. And so you can't make these decisions lightly, because they're hard to get out of at some point too. If they're not hard, it's just there's a loss of economic value for everyone to some extent.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the type of partnership also leads to maybe a more difficult or an easier transition out of it. What kind of partnerships have you seen? What types of partnerships do you usually see happening?
I'm a big proponent of 50-50 partnerships if you're talking about two doctors, or equal ownership with compensation based on production or collections or profitability, but the ownership levels being equal. But then there are people who get offered 30% stakes in a practice that's very large, and they might think of that as a good entryway to partner. The problem is you're subject to the whims of the controlling doctor for the rest of your career and the partnership, unless you've built a plan to eventually get to 50-50. And so I think not having an equal ownership stake is a negative from an aspect of a partnership.
Yeah, it's essentially a glorified associateship. Would you kind of agree with that?
Yeah. Yep. And before we, I don't think we're going to be talking about minority partnerships too much, but if you are buying a minority partnership, you are entitled to a discount on the price of your value. So if your practice is worth $1 million and you're buying 30%, the value of that is $300,000, but you really shouldn't be paying for that full value because you're not in control of the business.
And then I wanted to talk, I don't think we're planning on talking about the structure. A lot of times when people send me partnerships to value or to look at, it's so heavily based on the compensation structure, whether or not it's a good opportunity. It's unique in a practice purchase. You don't really look at that because, you're purchasing the entire business. But with a partnership, I think it's important. So what are some of the different ways that 50-50 partners usually divvy up the income? And how do they usually do that so that, when a buyer is looking at a situation like that, what can they expect to see?
Yeah. So a lot of places have a compensation set up on production or collections that would be 35% of your collections less 35% of your lab bills are paid out in the form of salary, and the remaining portion is retained as profits in the business. So you're incentivizing both parties to do that. There's also, even if you are 50-50 owners, you might give yourselves equal salaries. Let's say $200,000 a year for each partner paid out, in the form of salaries quarterly, but your share of the profits could be distributed based on your production or collections levels. And so even if you're 50-50 owners, so there's two ways to kind of splice it. I would prefer to see things set up on a compensation end as a salary based on production, and then you split the profits of what's left over. But that's just kind of me personally. I think that's a more common method that I see as well.
Yeah, I agree. That's the more common where you have you're getting paid as an associate plus your 50% ownership. You guys split whatever's left over. But that other situation you talked about, that's the one that I also wanted to touch on because, let's just say you have one partner who produces significantly more than the other. It would not be in the high producing partner's best interest to do a 50-50 split of profits when they may be responsible for more of those profits. And that's where that arrangement where you talked about where maybe they're divvying up profits as a percentage of who produced how much could come into play. But yeah, I agree. Those are kind of the standard ways of, reimbursing.
Yeah, so obviously you'd be getting it on the front end of being more productive, but also that you're doing a lot more dentistry, so you deserve it. And then I see your point on the profit distribution. One thing that I do see in partnership dissolution. So let's just say that you come on for a partner for 5 years, and we do a value of the practice when you come on as partner. When the partner leaves, you might revalue the practice, but his compensation or his production percentage might get taken out of the goodwill portion of the purchase price. And that's kind of a way to keep the parties aligned and working hard all the way through the sale. Does that make sense, George?
No, that does. And I think that clears up that compensation issue. But I like what you're saying. Yeah, I agree with that. Keeping everyone aligned and then moving towards the direction of practice growth, which I think is kind of the key to the whole partnership philosophy. And so one thing I like to look at is when somebody sends me something like this is to make sure that the practice can actually handle another partner. So can we talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So if there's already two dentists in the practice and the associate's just kind of being promoted, that's generally the most common situation. And usually the practice is able to handle two doctors. So patient numbers, you're looking at close to 2,000 patients, right, to really support two full-time doctors, hopefully more. And then the associate production on a monthly basis, should be in the range of 300 or 30,000 per month minimum before you even consider kind of opening them up as a partner type prospect.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you have to be, I think, yeah, that would be a poorly producing partner if it was anything less. And then,
Yes.
what other things are you looking at when assessing a partnership fit?
So, it's the personality fit between partners is huge. So would you help this person, when they're in need? Would you be trust that they would help you when you're in need, because as partners, you're going to be sharing, your professional lives for the foreseeable future. So, I have the analogy of relative or a sibling. You're kind of stuck with them. So is this something that, you see this relative every once in a while and you don't really care for them? Probably not a good partnership. If it's like that relative that is the cool, friend, cousin, or, the uncle that you grew up idolizing, that's probably a person that you want to partner with. And so, the age differential between partners is something that is real too. And so people need to understand that the other party is committed for the appropriate amount of time, and that you're going into this with some sort of succession plan of the partnership, because, time flies and people ignore things, and all of a sudden, you're 5-10 years later and the dentist might be ready to walk. So
a quick word from our sponsor, Q Optics. In the last episode, I mentioned that I had upgraded my loops from 3.5 to 4.5 while I was still in dental school. And when I did that, my neck started hurting. And I was so frustrated because I loved that 4.5 magnification. First, I thought, oh, it's the angle of declination, or maybe it's the weight because it's a bulkier frame and heavier loops, and maybe that's what it is. I realized that the reason my neck hurt all the time was how much I had to bend down to look over my loops. And so if you look at yourself in the mirror, this is what I want you to do. I want you to stand in front of the mirror with your loops on and look at your eyes looking straight forward. If the loops, if the telescopes are blocking your eyeballs, that means anytime you look at something that's not through the loops, you have to crane your head down to look at it. You are hurting your neck. It blows my mind. Why can't you make a frame that's taller, that reaches down further? And if you look, you can see that Q Optics has designed their own frame that dips down to make room for the optics to go below your eye level. So I can put on my loops and I can actually look in the mirror and see clearly my eyeballs completely over the level of the telescopes. If you find that your neck's hurting or that your back is starting to hunch, maybe it's not necessarily the angle of declination or the weight. Maybe it's the fact that there isn't enough room in the lenses to see over your loops. So if you're ready to make the upgrade to better ergonomics, you can email sales@qoptics.com. That's q-optics.com with the promo code SP16 for $100 off your next pair of loops or $300 off your next loops and light combo. Q Optics. It's time to have a better look.
Yeah, I'm happy you said that, because a lot of times I think equal age partnerships work out really well, but I don't think from at least my perspective, that's not the majority that I'm seeing out there. I'm seeing an older dentist wanting to bring a younger guy on before they're really ready to retire, but they have plans of it eventually. So making sure you have a plan for when that person leaves and have an idea of how long they plan on staying would be really important.
Yeah, and so I have this kind of down in the operational aspects of the practice, but having a mandatory retirement age or a minimum retirement age is something that's should be established in any partnership, or a minimum type of commitment. And if people leave before that, or you dissolve the practice based on a certain event, somebody is held responsible, or the value of the partnership is discounted because of their non-compliance with the vision of the practice, on the onset. But I think the senior partner having the realization that this person is coming on long term and they need to kind of make sacrifices is really important for a partnership, because like you said, the most common aspect is a senior person getting ready to start to slow down or want somebody to stimulate growth. They need to be willing to give up income, open up the schedule, treat the partner as an equal to make this, work from the beginning to set them up for long-term success.
I totally agree with that. And what other things would you maybe want to know from a senior partner? If you were a senior partner considering, what kind of things would you want to ask yourself?
You would start with a practice valuation, see where you're at, and see if giving up half of that value is an attractive consideration for you from an economic perspective. So using the the example of $1 million practice and somebody's buying in for half of 500,000, does that money excite you? Do you have a purpose for it? And if you're just doing it, and what are you going to do with it? I think, whether you're going to finance a deal internally with somebody, an associate that you trust versus you're looking for cash at closing is an important aspect for the senior partner to consider. And then, can you really commit to whatever the time frame is? Anything less than 5 years, it's really not a good idea to get into a partnership. You're not going to get the potential and the long-term benefits out of it. And so can you commit to 5+ years, 10 years of a partnership relationship?
I think I like what you said about, is there a reason? Is it good enough? Because ultimately, I think the whole purpose of partnerships is practice growth. I think that needs to be at the forefront of everyone's mind. So if that's not on the list of things that the seller is looking for, or a senior doctor is looking for, that might not be a good fit. And so I like what you talked about there. What about for a junior partner? What kind of things should we consider as younger dentists maybe looking to partner? How can we ensure, are we a good fit or not?
Yeah, so it starts with the basics of the personality fit and getting, that this is somebody that I like and really trust and want to be around for the next 10+ years. You should be making more money as a partner immediately than you were as an associate, assuming kind of this is a promotion to partner. So making sure that that's the case. And if you're not, then that's a red flag, and the compensation structure or whatever is not going to be set up for you. You don't want to become the Clydesdale of the practice for the next 10 years either. So is this person have the energy and the wherewithal to really be an effective partner for you? And that's, hugely important, because a lot of times that's when partnerships fail, is when, the senior doctor all of a sudden starts riding off and is making his 50% profit, and you don't have a compensation-based employment structure. The junior doctor will eventually just walk. And so you don't want to set yourself up to get in that situation. And, making sure that they've thought out the new structure of the practice, right? So you'll be forming a new, LLC or LLP, and, the assets of the prior practice are going to be purchased by the new partnership, or however the structure you're going to be. You want to make sure that the selling dentist is open to something that's fair and reasonable, and that you're not going to get doing a transaction that they want to do as a stock sale, and you get down the line and have to kill it at the last second. So, and
you brought up some good points there about the structure. Can you kind of talk about what are the things? So assuming that there's a good fit now, we've talked about personality, it's a good fit. What kind of stuff do you move on to then in terms of practice value, or other things that you would look at to make sure that we're on the same page on these issues? What kind of issues would you want to see that we're on the same page on?
Yeah, so practice value, you hinted at it. That's number one. And assuming, for the rest of this conversation, everybody agrees that the value is reasonable. The financing of the deal, you can get bank financing as a partner buy-in. The bank will take a 100% security interest in the practice. And so it's kind of a good deal for them. They're financing half the practice, but they get the entire practice as collateral. And then the other option is kind of to do a deferred pay-in structure, where the seller finances the practice over a period of time. From the senior partner's perspective, you can defer those payments and the taxes that are associated with that. So it could be attractive for the senior partner, and for the junior partner. You've got somebody who's financially backing, similar to a seller loan in a practice situation, financially backing your success in the partnership, as well as you don't have to come out of pocket for as much of the fund. So, that is something that I think most partnerships in that senior, older doc bringing on their associate as partners, those doctors are more likely to be willing to finance those than, kind of a market partnership buy-in or a group partnership buy-in where there's lots of partners, and, the partner group as a whole just needs an actual cash buy-in versus a deferral.
Yeah, I think that, like you said, I think the group one is definitely unique in that they are definitely looking for that cash. But the senior doc, I think it could almost be nice cash flow, having the partner payment over the next, 10 years or however long you structure the deal.
Yeah, I think 10 years would be on the long side for partnerships. Even though you can get, bank financing not that long, just I think most partnerships would be a little bit of a quicker, more along 5 years.
Okay, I did not know that. And so, what other things would you be looking for to agree on with the deal?
That you've already talked about, as you and the partner, that you are going to align your incentives, that you've are going to pay yourselves a salary based on production or profit split on production or whatever is reasonable. Agreeing to that, all that stuff is kind of right second line into getting the financing and the value set. And one thing that's may make the process a little easier for the senior partner who's selling is to maintain a role as senior partner or managing partner or managing member of the partnership to have some final decisions on any disputes that might arise in the first few years of the partnership, and especially if they are financing the transaction, it seems to be reasonable that they could be kind of the tiebreaker vote if there's a dispute. So what I would recommend is that be a short period of time for an associate buying into a practice, and that eventually the role of managing member no longer exists, or it's something that requires unanimous vote. If all of a sudden you start doing more of the work, it would require unanimous vote for them to maintain that role. And then you really, kind of getting into the nitty gritty of getting out your operating agreement and planning for the good and the potentially bad of whatever is kind of to come in the partnership.
So let's talk about that a little bit. Let's talk about the operating agreement and what goes into that and who's responsible and all of the specific things that you would want in there.
Yeah, so you would want to kind of define roles for the partner, define corporate policies, require yourselves to conduct, whether it be quarterly meetings or semi-annual or and annual reviews of policies and procedures. Who would be responsible for hiring and firing of staff, whether it would require both partners' approval or just one. Outline the specifics behind the profit sharing and the salary compensation. If there's any fringe benefits or expenses running through the practice that are unique to the partner, or even if you do different types of dentistry and the lab bills associated with each of your practice is significantly different, then you want to make sure that those are incorporated into the profit sharing or taking deducted from the partner's income. And then methods for dispute resolution is crucial for a partnership. You need to things are going to come up, and you need to agree to what is reasonable when you guys aren't in a unreasonable state. And so when you're drafting an operating agreement, having a provision to dispute or get disputes resolved is important. And then if the senior partner is selling the real estate or owns the real estate separately, getting a long-term stable lease dynamic that's going to be able to survive along with the partnership, even if the real estate interest or the doctor's ownership of the real estate interest isn't. We need to plan for whatever might happen there.
Yeah, the real estate one is interesting because a lot of times, like we had talked about in the seller's perspective episode, these older doctors own the real estate, and it can be in their best interest from the business perspective as a solo doc to charge a lot of money on their rent through their LLC or whatever owns the real estate. But from a partnership's perspective, then you kind of have to change that up and maybe be a little bit more clean and fair. And so I'm happy we talked about that. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, you're dead on. A lot of the real estates are pass-through entities or separate financial aspects outside of the practice. So you should get that validated and make sure that however you do it, that it's sustainable and good for the practice long term. And if you have an advisor involved that knows the market, they should be able to help you with that.
And so, what kind of things do you put in the agreement for risk management? Like, in case anything happens, what kind of stuff were you looking for there?
Most partners have disability and life insurance policies on one another to fund the practice buyout if an unforeseen event was going to happen. Again, we're talking about planning for the unforeseen when things are good. So if a partner leaves the practice early because and totally ignores their non-compete, right? You could have a blatant, phrase in there that they are entitled to zero payout of any of the practice value. Or if somebody retires prematurely just because they're going on another career, but they haven't fulfilled their obligations to the partnership, you as the remaining partner wouldn't want to pay them the whole interest, but maybe they shouldn't get zero either. So having policies and a method for funding the unforeseen is really prudent, because dental practices don't usually keep excess cash in their practice. So the partnership and their $30,000 checking account isn't going to be able to fund any of these buyouts. And it's a lot for the remaining partner to have to personally all of a sudden repurchase their own practice. So, if that is going to be the succession plan and the partner is going to retire in 5 years and you're going to pay them the full value and you're going to either get bank financing or pay it out of your personal funds, you should at least know that upon the onset of the partnership that that's your plan and be able to plan accordingly. So that's really, as it relates to the risk management, both parties agreeing to what's reasonable at a time when you can't predict what's going to happen. You either end up on the winning end or a losing end when it comes to partners buying each other out. There's a natural divergence of your interest, whether you're the buyer or the remaining partner or the seller. And so again, just kind of coming up with all this within your buy-sell agreement is really important.
Our mission at Shared Practices is to navigate the path to successful practice ownership. As this is something that we are constantly trying to improve, we ask for feedback from people who have already become practice owners. Feedback that we've been getting is that our podcast does not allow listeners to get enough information in an organized way where they can actually apply it to their situation as they're looking to buy a practice. I think this is the biggest area where our podcast falls short. We try our best to infuse the podcast with information, but ultimately the medium at which it is consumed does not always allow us to get exactly what we want for it. This is why we created the Ownership Accelerator. We saw a need for an in-depth and comprehensive course to cover both practice acquisitions and journey into practice ownership. It is our way of fixing all the things that we wish we could accomplish with our podcast, but are not able to. That being said, we have finally released the Ownership Accelerator. The Ownership Accelerator is an online course that takes you step by step through the entire process of buying a dental practice. The idea behind the course was based on our experiences helping people find practices, analyze deals, and ultimately their experiences closing. We saw the things that made some buyers successful and other ones not as successful. We saw challenges they face and ways to stack their cards in their favor to find a great practice. We teamed up with Paul Goodman, who has tons of experience working with both buyers and sellers. We also enlisted the help of professionals David Alvey, Brian Pender, and Rob Montgomery. The result was a comprehensive online course about buying a dental practice that consists of 12 sections, more than 80 10 to 12 minute videos, and the entire course comes out to be about 15 hours long. Included in the course is a 250-page course manual that gets shipped to you to help you go through the course. Also included, we have spreadsheets, worksheets, and checklists to keep you on track as you go through the process of buying a dental practice. The ultimate goal of the course is to help you find the right practice to buy, not just any practice, but the right practice for you. We strongly believe that the right practice will maximize your income and career satisfaction. Ask yourself what your career would look like if you bought a practice that maximized your income and career satisfaction. Visit ownership.sharedpractices.com for more information. I'll leave a link in the show notes. You can even take the first section for free. Start your career off on the right foot and take the Ownership Accelerator today. And then, I totally really happy you went through that, because again, I think that goes back to what you said earlier, where you are maybe being reasonable when negotiating situations that could be done unreasonably if they're not done right now. So I think that's good to get those things sorted out in advance. Well, on the subject of dissolutions, though, can we talk about that a little bit? What kind of things go into that, and what situations are they usually dissolved?
Sure. So when a partnership is started, you envision operating it for a set number of time, and then either somebody's going to retire or both of you are probably going to be around retirement age at the same time, and you'll just sell the practice and get your share out of it. So that's kind of the ideal partnership dissolution. But the reality is that stuff happens and partnerships dissolve before their intended life. And so some of the things that do happen, these qualify them as bad, is when death happens, disability, partner quits or leaves early, or they're fired because your operating agreement, we didn't talk about this then, but should have a minimum production or a minimum number of days worked each year to be able to maintain your status as partner. So if a partner isn't doing that, you need to fire them, or that should be outlined in your operating agreement. So obviously that would dissolve the partnership. And then there's things that specifically I list for dental practices as maybe appropriate for many other small businesses, but when you lose your license, or you're brought to the ethics committee and lose a judgment, or you have a divorce in your family, outlining that they can't get an ownership into the partnership is something that you can put into your operating agreement to protect you from having an unwanted partner into the partnership. So those are some of the things that kind of come up on the dissolution side of partners that really need to be adjusted and included in caveats of me as the remaining partner will pay 50% of the practice value unless these specific things happen, and they're not fun to talk about. And George, I'm sure I haven't convinced you that you're ready for partnership in this conversation either. But you and your partner need to be open about this stuff before you even sign the dotted line, because unfortunately it happens.
Yeah, and I think, but like you said before, I think it's great to get these things done beforehand so that they're not an issue when you guys are both upset about something. There's an agreement and everyone knows that if this happens, this is how it's going to be resolved ahead of time. Yes, and having it documented prevents litigation. And litigation is the last resort of any, me personally or any business relationship really wants. And so what other things do you think we need to talk about that we haven't already about partnerships? I think I'll just touch on a couple of the most important things one more time, is that this is a long-term commitment between you and your partner. And especially if you're the same age or both planning on having 15 or 20 years before your retirement, this is going to be the rest of your career you're with this person. So make sure it's a good cultural fit. Make sure that you align your incentives and that your culture is a match. And, typically you have a good sense of that as an associate. But if you're bringing two practices together and deciding to do a partnership, I'm not sure the best way to feel each other out in the office is, but find a way to do that, because you might love hanging out with them on the weekends and seeing them at society meetings, but it might not be a fit in the office. And then have a plan for communication, whether it's quarterly or monthly or whatever it fits, the rhythm of your practice, to, make it a priority that partners talk and air out grievances. If you can do it daily, even better. But there needs to be a protocol for partners to keep the growth, keep the goal setting happening, keeping the frustrations, kind of giving them a platform to dissolve. And that's hugely important. And then having compassion for your partner. You're entering into this relationship and you both need to be leaders. And I recently saw Chris Connors speak last week, who was the head of Sherwin-Williams, and he gave a couple points of leadership. And as a partner in a practice, you both need to be leaders. And so his points were, collaboration, velocity, courage, and compassion. And I think as a partnership, the compassion point was what kind of, when I was thinking about this, hits home for partners, and is just, that's a differentiator of success. And maybe it's a differentiator of whether partnerships are even right for you. I like what you said about compassion, and I think, that's a great place to end, because ultimately, I think you have to have and I think in any business arrangement, you have to have the long-term interests of the business relationship in mind. And that may mean in some situations taking a backseat or taking a less than ideal circumstance with the idea that long-term, the preserving the relationship is more important. So I really like what you said there. And I think for a subject we didn't talk about, I think we got through a lot in one episode. And I hope that anybody who's thinking about being a partner or looking at partnership opportunities got a lot out of this. I want to thank Brian again. Brian offers a lot of great services at Fairway. And Brian, you want to quickly talk on that before we close?
Yeah, absolutely, George. Thank you for having me. And again, Fairway Healthcare Partners is the name of our company. My wife, who is a dentist, is involved. My father-in-law is involved. And we really are dedicated to helping doctor-owned practices succeed. And so whether you're a buyer or seller or looking to grow your practice, we work with dentists day in and day out and would love to help you. We do not do kind of a dual representation mentality, and we're, take the fiduciary duties of our clients very responsibly. So, George, thanks for having me, and, happy to talk with anybody. I'm sure we can leave my contact information, but it's fairwayhealthcarepartners.com.
Yeah, and I'll put your email in the show notes. And I think that wraps up the 2 episodes with Brian. I'm sure we'll have him on more. Again, like I said in the first episode, he's one of those guys, he's almost like a Swiss Army knife in that, when I talk to him, there's subjects that, we talk about, I'm like, oh man, he knows a lot about that one too. And so, I definitely don't think this is the last we'll hear from Brian, and great guest. I appreciate you coming on, Brian, and I look forward to hearing from you in the future.
Sounds great. Have a good rest of your day.
I really enjoyed that episode. I hope you guys liked it too. I thought that partnerships was an area that I keep getting emails about them. People are looking at them, and I've almost felt bad that we haven't talked about them on the podcast. It's a big part of me getting into ownership. These partnership options great for a lot of people, and I think one of the things that I want to maybe have you take home is maybe ask yourself the question: is a partnership right for me? We talk about in the episode, it's a very personal fit. If you're a alpha person who kind of needs to be doing everything, maybe a partnership isn't the best thing for you. But if you're more laid back and less passionate about every part of ownership, maybe not passionate, but maybe not having to have your way all the time, then maybe you could be a partner. And I think there's a lot of benefits to that. And so I think in order for it to be a successful partnership, there was 2 things that I really felt like absolutely had to happen. So the first, I think you need to be better off with each other than without. So I think there needs to be some sort of lifestyle, income, whatever it may be to you. You need to feel like with my partner, we are doing something together that I could not do alone. And so I think that was one of the biggest things that I would take away from this is, looking at it, is this better than if I were to go do it on my own in all aspects? The second being, I think a lot of times, like we talk about in the episode, it's an associate and then they buy into the practice. And so in that process of buying in, it needs to be structured, or the practice needs to have sufficient cash flow to allow your income to increase after you buy in, because you're now taking a loan or you're financing it however you are. You're taking on some risk and you're hoping to get equity in the business. So you should have an increase in income as a result. And likely you'll have some sort of management function then. So it only makes sense that you make more money. And so I think that's a great way to look at it. And as opposed to all of the episodes we've talked about in this season about practice valuation, I think with partnerships it's a bit different, because you're almost basing the practice valuation based on your income as a partner. And so I think a lot of what you're looking at is how much are you making based on the terms of the partnership agreement. So I think that's the most important and best way to look at partnership opportunities, is assess the buy-in value, how much you're paying, and a percentage of ownership, and how much income you're getting as a result of that equity, and your however much dentistry you'll be doing at that practice. And so I think looking at your income as a partner would be the best way to assess the value of the practice and ultimately your buy-in. So it has to make sense on paper, and your income has to be greater after you buy in than before. And then I think the other big takeaway, and we have it on that resource that hopefully you downloaded either from our Facebook group or from the show notes, that goes over all those considerations. I think more so than ever, it has to be a great personal fit. Ultimately, it only makes sense to do a partnership if you guys are going to be partners for at least 5 years, we talked about in the episode. So you really need to ask yourself, is this a person that you could see yourself working with? And is the role that they have cut out for you what you want to do. And so I think having honest conversations and maybe figuring out some tough answers to some questions beforehand will make a smoother partnership after the fact. I think just that general concept that you really want to be solving all potential issues before any paperwork is signed, because signing it afterwards or getting stuff figured out afterwards makes things a lot more difficult, and you're really counting on people being reasonable, which is not always the easiest when you're caught up in the heat of a situation. So I think that is a great summary of, this whole episode about those of you who are looking into partnerships. It's not something we are, really going to spend a whole season on, but I think we got you hopefully what you needed to know. And if you have any questions, again, feel free to reach out to Brian or me, and we'll be happy to take care of any questions that you have. All right. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Shared Practices Podcast.